rather modest paragraph here, Bertha. You must sell yourself more, girl. She modestly says that her activities, research and teaching activities, cover areas relating to public health, families, adolescents, children in particular, health and healthy lifestyle experiences of black families in accessing and negotiating health and social care services. The whole lot,
That's
really.
Quite a lot, yeah.
My goodness, Bertha, do you have a life?
I'm a black woman.
She's a black woman. She does all the shifts. Right. Well, the shift that we're asking you to do, Bertha, is to present to us your thoughts on the topic that you elected to talk about today, black women's beliefs on health and healthy lifestyle. Dr. Bertha Ochieng.
Thank you, Cecile. Thank you, Cecile. I've known Cecile for quite a while, and both of us are activists, in another guise, being black women. Thank you, Jenny, and the team for inviting me to this, what I consider to be a really very important day, discussing, as was identified this morning, matters of life and death, really, in terms of these discussions. My only complaint, slight complaint, which I've registered, this is a conference looking at the health and well-being of black women, and I've been forced to eat sandwiches. So I've not come all the way from Bradford, Jenny, for sandwiches.
I tried.
I hope the dean is here. Is he? Your team.
The management. The management here. Management, please. Note.
Very little actually is known about black women's beliefs on health and healthy lifestyles. We know quite a lot about our attitudes towards health and healthy lifestyles. We know quite a lot about the illnesses that affect us as women of African descent. A lot of people have written about that. It's about us.
Can you hear?
Okay. No, there's no microphone. I'll try to project my voice. Yeah. And lots of studies have also been done looking at lay beliefs of health and healthy lifestyles with white working class women. Some of you are familiar with Anne Oakley's work in London in the 70s, Kellnan's work in the 60s and in the 70s also, and William's work, which looked at Aberdonians' beliefs on health and healthy lifestyles. But although we were the first in this earth, very little is actually known about us in terms of our beliefs on health and healthy lifestyle. And this really, what I'm going to present today, is part of a study that I did looking at African Caribbean families' concepts of healthy lifestyles and what their experiences are in terms of their beliefs. We all know the evidence that is outside there suggests that lay beliefs of health and practices of healthy lifestyle actually rely on individuals' experiences of their society and their cultural specific beliefs. That is known out there. But while we are looking at, when we look at things like hypertension or diabetes, we rarely tap into those cultural beliefs, and we rarely tap into the experiences of these women in terms of their socioeconomic status, in terms of their values, in terms of what is happening in their lives and could be causing those particular, whether it is diabetes or hypertension. Why are some of them responding to treatment? Why are some of them not responding? Why are some of them conforming in terms of their diets? And why are some of them not conforming? What does this tell us about? So yet, the connections between health and healthy lifestyle and the prevailing life situations of black women, and in particular black families, has received very little attention. All the illnesses that we know of, the exotic ones, thalassemia, whatever, much has been written about that, but very little about this particular area. I believe that understanding what influences black women's belief on health and healthy lifestyle is the first important step to develop specific cultural sensitive health promotion programs for some of us who are working in public health area. That's the first step really in terms of challenging our health and well-being. So this was a community-based study exploring the health and well-being of African Caribbean families in West Yorkshire. Some of you who've never crossed the north, somewhere there. And in this presentation, I report findings that examine Black women's beliefs and experiences of health and healthy lifestyle, and the dynamic and interactive interplay with their life experiences. I adopted purposive sampling, and I've actually written about my role as a researcher of African descent, a Black woman researching with Black families. Somebody in the morning was talking about subjectivity. Yes, it can be very, very subjective because you get lost in that research process sometimes as a Black woman. You know what I mean. That's the title of the paper that I've written in terms of researching with Black families. So in the end, I interviewed 10 Black families of African Caribbean origin participated in this study. This is a profile, just a snapshot of the families that participated in the study. There were households of lone parent and two-parent household. There were grandparents also living there. There was one family of a lone parent, but this was a dad who was living with his 3 children. The children that I've included there are all adolescent children from the ages of 12 to about 19. Different age groups, different occupations in terms of their paid work. What I've not included are extended families, because there are times that when I was doing visits, the extended families were there also. These were essentially family interviews, very, very long in terms of the manner in which it was conducted. But the data for this part of the study, with regards to which the findings I'll be presenting, was collected by in-depth interviews in participants' homes. It was an ethnography study. Some of you are interested in qualitative work. So it's about going out there and submerging yourself. And what I was doing, the interviews were very long, carried over a length of time. Essentially, the data collection took about 18 months for me. So I did repeated interviews, literally living in their homes sometimes, becoming one of them. The children even referring to me as auntie and mother and all sorts of things. I was fed, I was watered, I was taken to church, I was taken to the mosque for some of them who are Muslims, literally living in that. And again, that is an experience that I've written in one of the journals, looking at that particular experiences. And some of the really difficulties, because when you hear stories of others, which actually mirror your own as a researcher, that subjectivity element gets into play, in terms. But it's important that you actually position that and you place that within the literature outside there, to sort of challenge that kind of subjectivity. I was working with white colleagues, and I still remember coming back with, in terms of my findings, and being challenged by also white colleagues in terms of the findings that were coming out. One of the difficulties that surprised me, and I've not prepared myself, was that it was not going to be easy to get access to actually interviewing Black families. There were some real tough questions outside there, which is an excellent thing, in terms of the questions that the families were asking me. They wanted to know what the study was about, what it's going to yield, what I'm going to do with the findings, what is going to happen, etc., etc., etc. They did say that people have been to them, collected data, and flown out. So they really wanted to know exactly what was going to happen in that study. And one of the things that I was tasked was that, Bertha, you need to go outside there and tell those people who've got the power of what we have said. Hence the reason why I ended up publishing my work in terms of just to give back something small with regards to what I was given. And they saw themselves also as giving back. They said, as a Black woman, we know that if we allow you to do this, you'll progress. And when you are there, remember the young Black ones who are coming through also in terms of supporting them. So there was a lot of that also. My identity as a researcher was very fluid. There are times I was a researcher collecting data, slightly deterred. There are times I was a wife, because sometimes the men would ask me questions about my own personal life in terms of my life with my husband. So I ended up, and there are times I was a mother when the mothers were talking to me about their children and wanted to know about my own children. There was times I was a practitioner also. So it was extremely fluid in terms of my role as a researcher. And it really made me to think in terms of the kind of methodologies that we use for Black families. Essentially, it became an African-centric methodology in itself, because I had to give that time to the community. So there are times I would actually leave homes at about 11 o'clock. There are times I would be visiting a family and they're saying, we're going to church now, come to church first. So I would go in, and you know how our churches take long. I would sit in church. I would sit in church for 3 hours, you know, and then after church we have something to eat first, you know. I had not, I'm originally from Kenya, so I had not had ackee and saltfish. I was introduced to that and even offered the diet of it. And what was riveting was the similarities that were within amongst ourselves. You know, what the family saw was somebody similar one to them. At the one hand, they would see me as a professional, but the other hand, they would say, yes, you're from Africa, you've got an accent, but you're one of us. When they see you outside there, they see a Black woman. And that was very, very important for me in terms of building connections. And I've been trying to push for Jenny next time, Black women, both African Caribbean and women of African descent from the continent. But that's for another day, Jenny. So the main limitation on this study was that it was actually based on a small sample. However, this did enable the exploration of issues at length and did provide an opportunity to examine fully multidimensional elements of participants' lives and their own experiences. I would not have managed with a bigger sample than 10. Initially, I had 15 families who were recruited, but because of the length of the interviews and the manner in which I approached the data, I had to cut to 10. The data was also saturated with regards to that. What I'm going to present for this part of the study is actually the findings in relation to their beliefs about health. I'll look at the health first, and then I'll look at their beliefs about healthy lifestyles. In terms of the analysis of the data, I came out with 4 broad themes of what the women actually said and their families, what they believed to be, what their beliefs about health was. Health is exclusive in the sense that it differs from one person to another. And this is a quotation from a 43-year-old woman. Health differs from one person to another. I mean, as a Caribbean woman, the things that can make me feel healthy and good are different from my children, husband, and certainly different from white people and others. Okay? So essentially, the women there and the families believe that health is something that is personal and individualized and differs from one individual to another. Okay. So why do we expect them then to conform to the paradigms of healing and wellness that perhaps are from different ethnicities, while they themselves acknowledge that actually health differs from one person to another? This also included health as exclusive, this is the second theme, included tangible behavioral patterns, very, very much aware of issues like exercise, healthy diet, rest, sleep, etc. So they could reel off what the Department of Health, contemporary healthy lifestyle, health means to them. You know, health means having enough exercise, having the diet, having enough rest, having enough sleep, etc. However, what I was looking at that. While they made clear links between food, diet, and good health, they emphasized the importance of eating a traditional African Caribbean diet, such as yam, dashi, okra, etc. That to them was what a healthy diet was all about, and that to them is what health is about. They also talk about, this is a quotation here, African Caribbean diet is our identity. It's like our heritage. It's like one thing you feel you want to hold on to. They talk about all this healthy diet, but never include African Caribbean food. Why should I listen to them and lose my identity? To them are people like us who are practitioners out there preaching, you know, eating salad, water, and things like that. They even told me, you come from a hot country, you know our people, we love hot food. And this is a quotation from a 40-year-old woman. I was told to lose weight and to start going to the gym. But the sort of things they do in the gym in the name of exercise is like a form of discipline to me. I only went twice, and that was it. I guess it works for the whites, aerobics, weights, and all that. That's not exercise, but a punishing regime. Why not dancing and music? You can play music and dance for hours. You do it your own way, and without thinking that someone or some machine is controlling you. That is what exercise is for me. When you talk about health and the concept of exercise, that is what exercise meant for me. The women argued that dancing to music was not only a mechanism to provide much needed physical activity, but also as a means to manage the tensions of their daily lives. And most believes this would be a liberating and welcome alternative to what they consider the Eurocentric forms of physical activity. Okay? So when you're outside there promoting exercise, I know that Zumba is something that has been introduced in a lot of gyms, but it still very much takes Eurocentric forms in terms of that. And it actually originated, it's a very, very much African-centric way of exercise. Functional definitions of health, I'm going to be trying to be quick. And these are just some of the broad issues of functional definitions of health. Absence of illness, we talked about that. Functional family and social ties, the ability to perform certain roles. This is a quotation from a lone parent. I am seen as a single parent, but when we have an extended family, which is very healthy for me and my children. Again, talking about functional definitions of health there. And then the last one was multidimensional definition of health. I know that the word health doesn't just mean eating properly, cutting down on your cholesterol, cutting down on your fat level, things that can cause heart illness, high blood pressure, etc. Because you can do all those things and still not be healthy. So there's something here that they're making links with in terms of what health is all about. So it's not just about these things. There's something much outside their figure. In a sense, what they were telling me is that one can practice a healthy lifestyle but still not be healthy. So the last one, health as an outcome. This is a very interesting one and very, very a reflection of the women's life. The women narrated how health was a constructed commodity, which was a relationship with other attributes. For example, being involved in organized religious activities, being spiritual, resulted in good health. You meet them, how are you today? Like I would go to some of them work, as I said, I leave everything in God's hands. I leave everything to Jesus first, while experiences of racism and social exclusion resulted in poor health. So when we're outside there advocating and looking at essence of health, these have got this wider debates we've got to engage in them. And that's just, again, a quotation about the discrimination and in terms of looking for a job and how it made her ill and all sorts of things, really. Okay. So, and these are the findings in terms of healthy lifestyle. They do superimpose each other with the definitions of health. What does healthy lifestyle mean? Again, I came with three broad categories. They are tangible behavioral patterns, accessibility to public or social services, social order, and control mechanisms. These are some of the aspects of it that came out. When you look at part A in terms of healthy lifestyle, that's what really the Department of Health seems to advocate for and push quite a lot. No cigarette smoking, no drugs, alcohol in moderation, healthy diet, exercise a lot. The families also talked about this, but what was interesting was also part B, which they came up with. And perhaps it's something that is central with BME families, and in particular, people of African descent. They talked about equality and anti-discriminatory practices. You want healthy lifestyle? Give me equality. That for me is healthy lifestyle. You'll make me well 50%. Healthy diet, including the traditional African Caribbean diet, the need for African-centric educational curriculum and exercise paradigm inclusive of African Caribbean history and life experiences. When they were talking about controlling, these women were even recounting how, for instance, at work, one of them was telling me, who was told to go and lose weight, that she's got this white boss who's always on top of her. And when she went to the gym, there was this white man who's telling her to jump up and down, and she just said, I can't take anymore. Those are some of the links they made. So they talked about positive media images and information supportive of African Caribbean community beliefs and values, spiritual beliefs that is in keeping with African Caribbean values and beliefs. Rarely do we hear these in debates of healthy lifestyles, but these are key things that were important to them in terms of talking about healthy lifestyles. So in terms of talking accessibility to public or social services, jobs, being treated with equality in terms of social services, hospitals, etc., and not being abused simply because I'm a black woman. So when you're telling me to exercise, to do it, but I still don't have access to a job, I still cannot get access to my GP, how can I be healthy? Those are some of the questions they were asking. So the widely accepted notions of what constitutes a healthy lifestyle, with their emphasis on individual responsibility, were regarded as irrelevant. Talked about the government, the people in power, and the advice that they're making there. I mean, a healthy lifestyle is easier for the people with money. Those are some of the things that they said. This was a very interesting finding also, healthy lifestyle as a social order and control mechanism. A number of the women argued that the widely documented UK healthy lifestyle principles were actually a control mechanism to bring about social order in enhancing white British values and beliefs about healthy lifestyles. They felt they were being asked to conform to dominant values and beliefs. And I give an example. They talked about, for instance, the lack of inclusion of African Caribbean food as part of a healthy diet, African-centric paradigms of physical activity, and all sorts of things, even within research methodologies. Because I would go in with my timesheet, and they said, you know, if you go home in your compound, at home, they would ask me, where are you from? I said, I'm from Kenya. They said, if you go home to your community and with time, are they going to look at your watch? I say, no, so sit down there, child. Wait for us to finish first. So their African-centric paradigms of collecting data was very important to them. Such an omission in terms of healthy lifestyle was interpreted as an attempt to maintain social order and control over what is considered to be a healthy diet, physical activity, body weight, etc. Now, this was a very powerful message for somebody like me who comes from a public health background in terms of what the women were telling me and the families were telling me when I'm talking about healthy lifestyles to them. And some of them were actually rejecting that and saying you're only promoting certain foods so that the market is confined to enhance white British values, and we are forced to conform to that. And this was theorized as a social order and a control mechanism. You know, they talk about that. Two more slides here. Food being publicized, agreeing that it is enjoyable, really quality. You know that can't happen. It's not as if our food is bad. That's what they were saying. We just need to add a little bit less salt, less oil, and our food is good. And this 43-year-old told me, I'm rebelling against the whole system and do what I want when I talk to her. When I talked to her about healthy diet. She said she's not following because she was going through a tremendous discrimination at her place of work, unfortunately in the NHS. And she did say, I'm just rebelling against the whole thing. They should make my life better, the NHS first, before I start thinking of converting to other things. So it's a rebellion, according to her. They argued that healthy lifestyle be designed, you know, in terms of creation for jobs, also talked about community empowerment, harmony, understanding within and with other ethnic groups. So that for them were key elements of healthy lifestyle, not just the behavioral aspects of healthy lifestyles, but wider issues. They are tapping into their own living experiences, and those need to be brought in as part of healthy lifestyle. So what am I saying? The findings, in essence, suggest the existence of an ethnic assertiveness. The women were very assertive, families were very assertive amongst the women and their families, arising out of the feelings of not being respected, being discriminated, and the lacking of access to public space. It is actually the politics of projecting their identity in order to challenge existing power relations, and why not? Mujud has done some work on that, and Hilton also, in a chapter of a book that we've edited, has also looked at African-centric projections of their identity. And why not? Why shouldn't we do that? You know? It is also possible that the implementation of the Race Relations Amendment Act and work like yourselves have actually enabled the black women in this study to become politicized and assert the need for their ethnic identity, values, beliefs, etc. The reason why I've made these kinds of comments is that any time I've actually talked about this subject and also presented paper for publications, it always comes back, why were these families so politicized? Now, if you know black people like me, we are all politicized. Our voices are just not projected enough. We're just not being given enough time to talk about what we are feeling, to talk about our own views. But we're very, very much politicized in terms of that. And it's the work that we're doing within our communities that is enhancing that. So finally, these findings could inform the development of effective and culture-sensitive community health promotion programs for black women. I've got up to half past.
Yes, but we need time for questions, please.
Black women do not need to be converted into accepting the conventional healthy lifestyle practices. Instead, it is important that we are able to appreciate the logic of their beliefs on health and healthy lifestyle. And as Leavitt and Springett in their excellent book argue, if we are to build healthy communities, we have to drop our masks and see health and well-being of an individual from a much broader perspective. Okay? There's the whole notion, the new public health document, which talks about nudging individuals to maintain a healthy lifestyle. That will have limited effect if it doesn't really take into account their cultural beliefs, their lived experiences, etc. etc. I've finished now. One last thing. Somebody asked a question about spirituality. A lot of issues of spirituality came out of here. And I've actually published a paper a journal paper on spirituality and how that can actually be used in terms of enhancing individuals' health and healthy lifestyle. Individuals' health and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Quickly, questions, please, comments, observations to Bertha. That interesting juxtaposition of the Eurocentric understanding of healthy lifestyle and the African, Caribbean,
if I could, like to make a comment. Sheila Bailey here. With regards to our food not being recognised as a healthy diet, I was diagnosed type 2 diabetic. It's coming up to 2 years now. And GP sent me off to a class, which ran over 4 weeks. Second week, we had a dietitian coming to do a talk. I speak about healthy diet, and I'm a woman, I like my ethnic food. And that's what I brought my children up on. There was no mention of this kind of food. So I let her speak. When she'd finished, I'd said to her, hey, I don't eat X, Y, and Z. This is what I eat. What happens here? With regards to yam, an inch of yam. I looked at this woman, are you mad? Plantain, an inch of plantain. Basically, bulk up on your veg, but then you still have to be careful what veg you're eating because there's fructose and such like. And I gave that woman such a hard time. I was so disruptive in that class, basically because I felt as if our food had been alienated. And basically, I eat my food. I just cook with a little less oil.
Absolutely.
And X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely.
Jenny?
Hello. I'd just like to answer that question actually about Caribbean food being healthy, because that's kind of where I came into this whole kind of work around ethnicity and health, and that's probably, I think when it was the beginning of the 80s, and there was a lot of debate about Rastafarian diets not being healthy. So we actually got some funding to look at Caribbean food and diets, and to look at its nutritional content and how healthy it was. And I was also very lucky to do some work in Trinidad and Jamaica at the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute. And what we came up with is that Caribbean food is healthy.
Absolutely.
Yes, you do have to look at the portion sizes, and you do have to look at using less salt and less oils, less sugar. But actually, it is a healthy diet, and you know there have been a number of research studies since to actually demonstrate that. And one of the things we did at that time, and we're talking about the early 80s, is we actually produced materials for health workers on healthy Caribbean diets and how to give nutritional advice that is culturally appropriate. And so I get really, you know, I go to places now that say, we don't know anything about Caribbean food. And I thought, well, the work has been done. And yet, you know, in a way it's indicative of what happens to us all the time. You get, you know, a bit of work like this, it's done, people tick it off, and it's shelved. And it doesn't somehow get built into practice.
I think what really surprised me, and I was looking at this when I was preparing my talk, is that I actually looked at the UK food paradigm. And it's very, very conventional when you look at the UK food paradigm. Very little has been done on foods from other ethnicities and things like that. Now that is just food, and then there are other aspects of it, and then there's our lived experiences, which actually contribute a lot to things like hypertension, diabetes, what, and things like that. But you go outside being diagnosed with diabetes, nobody talks about your living experiences, the discrimination that you're facing outside there that could have led to that, but you're told about your diet in terms of controlling that.
Donna, did the lady at the back, did you want to ask a question also? No? Donna, come.
How long were the interviews? At times 10, 12, 15 hours, because I did repeated visits. I've got so much data, I've not looked at all of it, so much data, you know, in terms of that. But I had to give that kind of time also, yeah, just to fit it. No, they were family interviews, yeah, family. And all of them were tape recorded, yeah. Yes, transcribed by me. I'm a black woman.
Thank you, but thank you very much. No, No, spot on. European time. Yes.
There's a web camera there. So it hasn't seen you.
Actually, but Anne didn't stand in the camera.
I think she did for some of them, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
We want to make sure that you're there.
Oh, right, okay. Where? Oh, here.
No. Actually, right at the front.
Oh, right. Okay.
So when you do your introduction.
Okay. It's the next presentation. Okay. Is that yours? Yes. You all ready? No? Okay. Shall I now introduce our second speaker, Dr. Nancy Greer Williams, who's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. Impressive background, whose wealth of experience. Her most recent work, I assume, is what she's going to share with us today, involved time spent on doing focus group work in 3 rural Arkansas communities with African American women, and you're in the process of publishing the data of that. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing from you.
And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to talk about my studies. And let me just kind of fast forward. My talk is not exactly about my latest research, but it kind of talks about the correlation between the 2 cultures of what's going on in the United Kingdom with African Caribbean women, and also in the United States with African American women, Hispanic women, and women of various colors. So, just to give you an overview, and I always like to start with what the literature says, because that's really a foundation of what we all kind of know what's published, so we know whether it's true or not true. It gives us a basis for knowledge. Then I'm going to talk about some health behaviors that impact health that seem to be classic to African Caribbean women. We're going to talk about the hypothesis on some of the poor health outcomes that the literature talks about, and then strategies for engaging African Caribbean women into action. So when we start to look at the literature, and again, I'm not from the United Kingdom, so I'm an outsider. So these are some of the things that, what we learned about the African Caribbean population, and you probably know this to be true, but the large proportions are of Jamaican origin, and then they trace origins to nations such as Trinidad and Tobago, as my daughter corrected me, and then the South American mainland. One other thing is that the literature says that there's an extremely high rate of mixed race relationships, and there's a prediction that this could in fact become the first United Kingdom ethnic group to disappear because of all the mixture. Now, there are distinct patterns of mental illness, and this has been talked about in this forum today, and some of those are anxiety, depression, non-affective psychosis. They're at high risk for suicide mortality. They're more likely to be subject to compulsory hospital admissions and are less likely to be satisfied with the hospital services. And again, this is a voice of the research community. Might not be true, this is what it's showing. So when we look at communicable and non-communicable diseases, African Caribbean women are the top of the chart for type 2 diabetes, sickle cell disorders, renal problems, hypertension, angina, breast cancer, and the human papillomavirus. When it comes to breast cancer, this ethnic group is the second most diagnosed cancer among African Caribbean women in the United Kingdom. And if it's anything like what happens in the United States, these women are late diagnosed, they have larger tumors, which their prognosis is probably poor. And some of the literature points to the fact that a lot of it's based on misinformation in the culture. It could be, I'm not sure. But also, when we look at the primary care, is that African Caribbeans are less likely than the general population to report morbidity and to receive formal diagnosis or treatment for common mental disorders such as depression. And it could be, as many have talked about, it could be the way the question is asked. It could be the way the provider asks the question. You know, many times, like it's been talked to about today, is many women don't want to tell the provider that they feel depressed or they have some sort of anxiety. So again, these symptoms tend to be diagnosed later. So what are behaviors that impact on health related to this ethnic group? One of the, to me, most profound things that I found was those who are born in the United Kingdom and relocate, they consume less traditional foods, fruits, and vegetables and more saturated fat than the Caribbean-born subjects or those in the homeland. They do not have the same exposure to sunlight and fresh air. They do not exercise or participate in recreational activities as in their native land. And as we all know, this impacts on health outcomes. They're also more socio-economically vulnerable, as was spoken about a lot today, and they're almost twice as likely as white British women to live in the most deprived areas of the city. And they're, excuse me, more likely to have less stable sources of social support. And they're almost twice as likely to be a single parent. And again, these are factors that impact on an individual's health. So when it comes to sexual behavior, they're more than likely to have concurrent partnerships. They're at high risk for sexually transmitted diseases, STIs, and the HPV, and HIV/AIDS. And when it comes to cervical cancer incidence rate, they're 2 times higher than the worldwide rate. Now again, this is what the literature is saying, and I'm not sure how it bears out in reality. In obesity and type 2 diabetes, again, if you're not exercising, if you're not getting healthy foods, you're more than likely to have a risk for type 2 diabetes compared to people in the general population. They're also at high risk for obesity. It could be for the foods or whatever, but this is what the literature is showing. So when we look at what are some of the reasons for the poor health outcomes, to me, what is obvious is that when you move to a new community, away from your family and friends, you lose your social support for a period of time. And that tends to impact on your understanding your core values, those things that you hold dear. We find this a lot in many African American women, many Hispanic women. So they function, but they don't function with the same strength as they do in their native lands. So that impacts on their ability to understand the core values, those things. How do you act in society? How do you have a healthy lifestyle? How do you date a man? How do you cope with stress? Again, that's been talked about a lot today, but again, if you're not taught this from those that you trust, you tend to just do what you feel what is right thing to do, and that might not be the right thing for this particular environment. So you end up with a lot of women not being able to cope or not have an outlet to coping. And they also, how does somebody teach you how to have a positive health behavior, ultimately? Now, so this creates barriers to health outcomes. It impacts on the literacy level of African Caribbean women. There's also a thing which I find, which I'm looking at a lot, is the cultural competency of health providers. We have a lot of doctors. They can be of minority populations. They don't have the same training. They don't have the same understanding of life values. So when you sit down and talk to a woman or a patient from a culture who really has a difficulty in language or barriers, there's an issue. Now, for the patient's point of view, my provider is racist or my provider doesn't understand. But on the provider side, they're swamped with all these patients. They don't know what to do, and they do the best that they can. So there's a barrier created. There's a lot of myths and misinformation regarding health. And how do you deal with health? Again, if I'm coming from my native land in which I had resources that helped me to have a healthy lifestyle, and I come into an environment that is not as safe, it's not as secure, I don't have the resources, and I don't have people who naturally speak to me, that impacts on my health. And so again, as racism, it's an ism, and there might be many isms. So what do we do at this point? And I don't think it's just one strategy. It's going to take a village. It takes multiple ways in which to turn this mechanism around. It's the same way in the States, you know. To me, the key is community engagement, giving the African Caribbean women a voice. And that's what I do not see in the research literature. We see people that do research on the culture, but again, where is their voice? Now, focus groups help. They do. But they don't empower. And that's where we're at. So we need something that will enable the community to have a say in the decisions that impact their lives and the lives of their family. They need to have an equal partnership with the academic community. And in order for the academic community to really understand the health barriers from their point of view. And what we do, or what we're learning to do, is, well, one of the things I like to do is establish a community advisory board. And what it is, I take people that are interested in working for their community's health, and I form a board. And I actually involve them in my research project. I make them researchers. I give them field notes, and I give them cameras. And they go out in the community, and they help take pictures and talk about incidents that happen with their neighbors and their friends. And then they bring that back, and then we talk about strategies. We also, in a collaborative manner, talk about what are the health priorities for their communities. You know, someone talked about cookbooks. I mean, our exercise. You know, how do we make, these are important, we know, as public health officials, but then how do we make those factors unique for a particular population? It's only when we give them equal voice. So sometimes it might be difficult. Let me share an experience. I'm working in, currently now I'm working in Texarkana, which is a community on the border of Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma. There's probably 4 or 5 other states. And so there's a lot of geographic issues, like what you can do in one state, you can't do in another state. So one of the things that we have, and you might be aware of it, that there's a lot of people who have come into the country from South America, from Mexico, illegal immigrants as they call them, but they're people, right? They're people in the community. And but there's a fight in the States to keep this, to really not to give them any voting rights or any sort of rights at all. But to me, you have a group of people, and if disease breaks out in that community, and if there's no barrier to protect them, guess what? Disease does not discriminate. It will go into the main community. So I've set up a community advisory board. I've done interventions where we're in the process of developing an intervention where we're going to build a safety net for that community, where we're going to team a person from their community and train them as a community health worker, and that community health worker will be teamed with a clinical care unit on a particular disease, most likely diabetes or some sort of chronic health disorder, so that instead of a doctor just coming and giving a set of instructions to a person and thinking that that person is going to take those instructions, know how to eat, know how to maintain, follow those instructions, they don't. And which is why we all end up with the same type of disparities that you talked about here today. But by having somebody from their culture who can speak their language, who can talk the way they do, who understands some of the food issues and how to translate the doctor's instructions into reality for the patient is more likely to have positive health outcomes. The doctor is able to communicate with that patient, and the patient is being able to feel secure about that, satisfied with that. And that's what we're doing. And that ends my presentation for today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nancy. Questions, observations, or comments, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi Nancy, I found that really interesting. One of the things I want to ask you a bit more about is this notion of acculturation. I've been doing some research with young African Caribbean women born in the UK, and certainly what's coming out of the research that I'm doing with those young women is that in terms of acculturation is that as each generation kind of lives here, they become more and more like the host generation.
Exactly.
Well, actually, these young women are completely rebelling against that. They do not want to be like the host generation. So what they are doing is they're almost constructing a kind of British Caribbean identity,
Right.
that is kind of based upon, you know, their kind of value systems, which are Caribbean, which are based upon Caribbean food, music, culture. So they're kind of really resisting acculturation.
Right. We have a similar thing happening in the States. But then the thing of it is, what I asked, are you going to be, ultimately they got to be part of the system if they're going to exist. I mean, for schooling, for anything that they do, they have to become part of the system. Now, they don't necessarily have to lose their identity. And I think that's where coming into like a community engagement type of strategy for that group would be very helpful to help them understand both angles of it. Because a lot of times the young think, as you all know, they think they're invincible. And so they don't think it's going to impact them. But 10 years, 15 years down the road, guess what?
Can I respond to that?
Quickly,
Okay. What's interesting is that these young women are very aware of the experiences of racism and discrimination that their parents have had. So they're very aware that just by trying to be like the host culture isn't going to stop them from experiencing racism and discrimination. So they've got a really sophisticated understanding, which I was kind of, quite sort of humbled by at such a young age.
That's wonderful. And what is her age?
These are 15 to 16-year-olds.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that, Jenny. You picked it up before I could get to say that I think UK-born black young people see themselves as trendsetters and don't really want to conform to what's going on. They set the trend. They set the trend in hair. They set the trend in clothing. They set all of the street, all of those trends. And those young people drive those trends. And you can see them. You look at popular culture today, the majority of that culture is actually trended by young black people. And that's one of the issues really with regards to the way they see themselves in the society. They understand the racism issue and they tend to take the power in their own hands and choose their own way of actually setting their own culture up and running.
That's good. That's great. That's great.
Dawn, do you want to ask a
I'm
question?
hearing that and I'm thinking it's really positive on one hand, but on the other hand thinking about some stuff I was talking about today about what that does in terms of people being able to be full citizens and demand of services and demand their rights and see themselves as being British, and with all that comes with that, and also thinking about how, particularly for the women I was thinking about talking about their health-seeking behaviours, because some of the social network science, the social network analyses suggest that having strong ties, strong cultural ties, is on the one hand really powerful, because it gives you a sense of belonging and all those positive things. But on the other side, it can be quite negative, because what it does is it binds you in and keeps you inside something, which means it's very difficult for you to be outward facing. And in terms of engaging with wider society, we have heard this morning about people being told they can't go for certain professions, for certain things that are not available to them. And if you're very much inside, then I'm trying to get at that. I can see that there's some really good things in that, but there's also something that for me is a little bit worrying about what's happening for these young women, about how they see themselves as full participating citizens with all that brings.
Sorry, Jenny, I've got to go and I'll come back later. Yeah. Hello. Come on, Cecily. Come on. You can't hear you, Cecily. Come up here.
I was instrumental in fact talking about disparities between the UK and the USA. One of the things we talked about was engagement in the academy. That's really, really quite dramatic for me. I've been at the academy for 15 years or so, and the academy is actually wrecking my health. Yeah? So how do we... And actually, it's the academy from which all this misinformation is actually coming from. We know they cannot research, but they themselves are a real source of problem. And unlike the USA, there's very, very few black people in the academy here. So how about you calm ourselves when we're so easy to be within the academy? We're outside the system.
Well, one of the things, and I'm not sure, I didn't have a chance to look, one of the things that, how we start, and again, I want you to know that my research is in the state of Arkansas. Arkansas is really one of the, if you heard of the Tea Party, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this, I work in a very oppressed state, and there are a lot of groups in there that really need to be empowered, engaged. And when we look at health disparities researchers, what I'm doing, there's a handful of us across the country. But one of the things that I was able to do is that there were certain initiatives, funding grants, that allowed me to do this type of engagement work. Now, I was just told by one of my supervisors before I left, because I am, in a sense, helping what are considered, well, the scud of the United States right now, the undocumented citizens, and then I'm getting funding from a federal fund that I might be classified as aiding and embedding. But then he's also of the same mindset that I am. If something if disease breaks out, and just to give you a case how bad it is, I had a woman who wanted to come to a focus group to talk to me about her issues. She came, she's a high-risk pregnancy, okay? She has a child with Downs. So in order for her to go to a doctor, she has to pay out of her pocket each time $150. Okay, her husband they're both immigrants. So, you imagine what type of salary that they would make. So at having the barrier of $150, how often do you think she can go? Now, another issue that's coming that I don't know if you heard of in the States, by 2013, there's a mandate that all hospital records have to be electronic. It's called the electronic EHR mandate. So the problem there is that if you don't have a Social Security card, you don't have a ballot number, you're not getting into the system to see a physician. The physician would treat you, but the receptionist will not let you pass the gate doing their job. So this woman, she doesn't have a Social Security card, she can't get a driver's license. She drove to the focus group because she wanted to tell me her story. And I said, why? And she said, well, I drive the speed limit. And this is what I do so I don't get caught. But, so it's difficult there. But again, I just got a grant from the university. It was a $50,000 grant. And that helped to set up my first CAB, as I call it, Community Advisory Board. They know that something has to be done. Again, the community itself is primarily Hispanic. I'm doing Hispanic, African Americans, and rural whites, which I'm going in there and getting information that nobody else has been able to get from these people. That was one grant. There's another grant that I'll be writing. So there's pieces of grants that I've been utilizing. There is, even coming here, somebody said that there's a grant for me to collaborate on to get money to fund to do some work over here, which I'll take advantage of. So it's no win, but it's a little bit.
I think Cecily raises a question that should be open to all of us in the academy. There's so few of us, and those that are in it struggle, and one could even say that in some places there's ethnic cleansing going on, and the way in which HE's been reconfigured, it's an opportunity for those who didn't want us there in the first place to get us out without having to justify that. And the issue of the gaze that they put on us block our opportunity to look at set our agenda. I mean, these are things I think that are pertinent to all of us who are involved in creating knowledge and seeing the knowledge that's been created by us, by those that are not of us. I mean, these are fundamental questions, I think, that are pertinent to all of us. Sorry? A knowledge about us. Yeah, 21st century Britain, we're still in this situation. Us being the other. Oh yes, it's a dangerous, dangerous place to be if you're not white.
Are publications able writing about that doesn't help at all to turn the tide? There are
so few of us within the academy, isolated, marginalised. I mean, it is difficult in the UK. Are there any further questions before we go to the next speaker?
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'd like to introduce you to the last formal speaker for this afternoon, Jacqueline Walker, who is going to share from us. She is from Jamaica, accomplished a tremendous amount, including her recent publication, aspects of that she will be sharing with us. So could you please put your hands together for Jacqueline.
I keep feeling like I want to kind of have a little, like a stool here. But usually I think people can hear my voice because I used to be a teacher, so I'm used to people behaving bad at the back.
We can do that if you want.
No. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Let me introduce myself first. because this session is going to be a bit different. This is not a theoretical session. Maybe in a way it's quite a good way to finish this programme. First of all, who I am and what my background is. Actually, I was born in America, and then I went to Jamaica, and then I came here, and I think that is a really important aspect of people of Caribbean descent here. They tend not to be of one experience. They're often of many experiences and many displacements, and I think that's a particular issue about their health. Anyway, I came to this country. I spent quite a lot of time from the time I was about 11 in children's homes. I then became a teacher in a very difficult all-boys comprehensive school in southeast London, when they used to have social priority area schools, you know, where all... And actually this shows you, I came here in 1959, I went to school in Brixton. I was the first black child in my Brixton school. When I was teaching, when I went to Goldsmiths, I was the only black British student in the university. When I then taught at school, I was one of the first, Ilya, if you remember that, teachers in the GLC. So I'm this very weird generation. Most people who came as adults. I came as a child. There are a handful of us. And that's really what I've written about. And since then, I became an advisor teacher. I worked in special units for behaviourally disturbed young people. I worked in prisons. And then I decided I wanted to write my family's story. Not for publication, it was never for that, but for my children, because I thought, we're lost. We're not there. We're not properly there. And I know since then people have done some things. You know, you do have, you know, Small Islands by Andrea Levy and that, but that's fiction. And my complaint with that, and it's a good book, is that it's too funny, because it wasn't funny. And also, it's too individualised, and it makes the racism in it easier to handle. And the racism, you know, I was one of those kids running around after my mother, trying to get home, reading the notices, no blacks, no dogs, you know. So, and that changes your mentality, and not only does it change yours, but if any of you have ever done any Holocaust studies, what you know is oppression goes down 2 and 3 generations, even if it's not directly experienced. They've done research on the grandchildren of people who were Holocaust survivors, whose children never knew that they survived the Holocaust, and the signs are still there. We need to be conscious of that when we're thinking of health outcomes in our community. I now I'm writing, that's what I do, which seems a really strange thing to say. It feels like saying something like, oh, I don't know, I watch television or something like that, because it's a profession that most people want to do. It's actually quite a tough one, because it means most of the time you're by yourself, so it's great to be here. But I also work now with, I'm a trainer as well, and I work a lot with a number of universities going and speak, particularly on their social work and social work training course. And that's really how Pilgrim State got the award from the Social Policy Association for Best Publication, because suddenly it started being used in social work courses to train students. And that's partly something that I want to talk about, that however much we know about the statistical data, and it's great to know it, and I want to know it, and I had to go and learn about it before I could write about it. It's really important that when we're communicating about these issues, we remember that actually what we're talking about is people's lives. So if you like, I see one of my purposes, my political purpose, my creative purpose, is to bridge that gap between the 68% of black women have blah, 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 and actually what it's like to be that woman who's waiting to see whether she's got a lump in her breast and whether it's going to be fixed. So I then wrote this book, which is a mixture of, it's written really like if you read it, you'd think you were reading a novel. It's written in 4 narrative voices. It's It's my mother's first person, and for the therapists amongst you, I think it was actually a very interesting practice to put myself in the position of my mother telling her story. So it's written from my mother's perspective, from me as a child, growing up, so from about the time of 7 to about 11, 13, then it's written as me as an adult, reflecting on it as well, and it's also written in the third person, and it includes photographs, and it also, and this is why it was taken up so much by universities, it includes original documentation. So, let me just see if I can work this. Yes. My mother, when she was in America, was actually taken away and sectioned and taken into Pilgrim State Hospital, which is why the book's called Pilgrim State. I thought that was quite a nice play on words, because, you know, people went to America because they thought they were going to the land of freedom, and the land of freedom turns into something else, becomes one of the major homes of slavery as well. But also because we're so filled up, aren't we, with thinking about migrants and economic migrants and refugees. And I think, to me, the way I've recited it in my head is that actually to be a migrant is a very courageous thing to do. It's a pilgrimage. And that's what most of our parents did who are here. They went on this extraordinary pilgrimage to give us the gift of what we have here. So it was a kind of act of commemoration. But you can see what I did actually was use the transcripts here of her time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read you a few sections from the book, and I'm going to have a few comments as well. So this is how the book starts. I've actually never read this out because it doesn't usually go down very well, but this is actually my imagination of what's happening with my mother when she's in Pilgrim State Hospital. So we're in Brentwood, New York State, May 1951. So this is my mother speaking. It's good the walls are white. In the morning, before they turn on the electric, when the room is lit by the watery sun that starts the day in this place, you can see the walls are white. It's probably the only time you can tell the real colour of anything round here. This morning it's the young nurse who unlocks the door and flicks the switch, and now I hear it, the electric hum and hiss of the yellow slither that runs across the ceiling of my head. The lights drench my eyes, seeping down my body like a stain. Before I get a chance to shade my face, the nurse is there, standing by my bed. "Come on, dear," she says. "Put that hand down. We don't want any trouble today now, do we?" Huh, what does she know about trouble, this young thing? She shrugs her shoulders like I'm a stone in her shoe. I want to catch her by the arms, hold her face up close to mine, but instead I smile like sweetness. "No, ma'am," I say, and I'm glad to hear my voice sounding soft and low. "No trouble today. I have my hearing this morning, and trouble is the last thing I need." They all love that good nigger voice. Makes them feel safe. "Please, nurse, can I have my comb?" "Well," she says, and now she's smiling. "You're so much better, aren't you, dear, ever since you stopped getting all upset. Let me see you take your pills, and we'll see what we can do." Okay, so when my mother was sectioned in hospital, she actually had my brother while she was there. She was pregnant, and my brother was taken away at birth and put away, and they weren't reunited until my brother was about 18 months old. And when students, so particularly social work students, the question they want to ask me, they always want to ask you, and I'm paraphrasing now, someone did actually say it in this way, so I'm just going to say it, and they say, "Yeah, but was she mad?" And I always think, isn't that an interesting question? Now, if you went in when a woman was pregnant, took her away, filled her up with sedative drugs, then took her child away at birth, and she decides not to speak to you. Is that a healthy or an unhealthy response? Now, I would say, having been a mother, that's a really healthy response, because I know that that's what I would do. The other bit of context, of course, to this story, and it links to a bit like what I was saying about politics, is that this was happening during the time of McCarthyism, and my mother was involved in politics. And Pilgrim State Hospital now has become renowned for doing the highest amounts of lobotomies in the world, and also the highest amount of clitorindectomies in the world, which means they take out the woman's clitoris to calm her down. And of course this was done disproportionately to black women, and many of the women who were put there, it is suggested, and I would suggest, were there actually for political reasons. So that's that story here. So in the book it goes on further, and we can see some of this. This is going through, in many ways, what we've been talking about as the black experience. Because here I am. You're supposed to go, ah, and you didn't. You know what? What's the point? That's me. That's me. And you need to look at that photo, because last year when I was on a conference from the British Psychological Association about children and trauma, I spoke about this photo in particular. Because if you notice, this is in Jamaica. My mother by now was in England. She'd left me with my grandmother to be looked after. And what was happening here is that my uncle was here going, smile. And if you can see, I'm not smiling. And they tried everything, and I would not smile. And actually, that was my resistance, because I wasn't happy. And the trauma of that separation has marred generations already and generations yet to come of Caribbean people here. Okay. That's when we caught up with my mother, and you can see we didn't come the normal way. We came via Canada. This is me here. This is my brother, and that's my mother. And this was our constant experience coming into the UK because of the way we did it, of always being very isolated. We weren't in that comfortable community of blackness that many people found themselves in. And you know that photo? Thank you. You know that photo that gets taken to be sent home?
Yes.
In that awful dress that really hurts you down there? And this was it. And when I went back to Jamaica to start piecing the bits of my stories together, which was a very interesting experience myself, just in itself. And when I went to my auntie's house, there was this photo of me that was sent back to show how everything was fine. But in fact, of course, everything wasn't fine in any way at all. Yeah, I don't know why I've got that one. I just like it because I think it's more realistic to what was actually how me and my brother were. We're just stuck into a booth somewhere, and that really is the last picture I have of my mum being really healthy. I'm blocking my mother. That's very forget the therapist here. Don't notice that. Yeah, that I kind of treasure because it's the last photo I have of my mum being really healthy. And again, it poses this question that I asked earlier. To me, our experiences of racism at that time in the early 60s, late 50s, was so raw. My mother's anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it, when we were having dog feces put through our letterbox, when we were having to nail up our windows, when we were having petrol bombs put through our letterbox every single day, and the social worker would come and think my mother was paranoid, you know, I suppose what I'm saying is I'm quite interested in thinking really about what racism actually does to the mental health and the physical health of people. So the next section I'm going to read.
5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Really? I thought it was only 3 when I started.
5 minutes or so to ask
Oh,
questions.
right,
So
okay.
Another 12 minutes and people can ask lots of questions.
Okay. Okay, I'll skip that one.
No, go on. Oh, go on. Is that...
Because it's tea, so
Okay.
let's go into tea.
Okay, should we go on?
Okay.
I wanted to read 2 more
please, no,
sections.
carry on.
2 more sections.
Yes, please. You can always buy the book.
You can. This is now written from both mine and my mother's perspectives about what it was like to arrive in the UK, first of all. The men fastened the rope from the ship to the ground, lifting the stairway and fixing it down, and that was it. Just like that, they were joined to the land. Jackie shivered and shoved her hands in her pockets. The cold had seeped through every seam and buttonhole of her cotton dress, even before they stepped from the ship. This place, no blues or green, just every shade of grey she'd ever seen, and then some more besides. Jackie wiped her face and looked at her fingers. The dampness shimmered on her hand, and in the mustard glow of the street lights, it seemed to the child as if her skin had taken on the same silver greyness of everything else around her. She looked up. There was her mother. She could barely see her. The fog had painted dark circles on her face, where her eyes had once been, and every now and then great plumes of boiling steam gushed from her mouth and nose, so she looked like a dragon from the storybooks. "Stay close to me, hold my hand." What a journey, Dorothy thought, as she stepped over the gutter. The children's faces seemed pale in the gloom. Where was the station? The baby kicked. She stroked her belly. The crossing had been nothing but a trial, all 3 of them cramped up in such a small space, with her 4 months swelling and being sick every day. She looked at the suitcases piled up on the ground and felt all her hopes rising up again. This was it then, a home at last for her and the children, a new home in the old country, a new starting mother in the old motherland. She smiled and pursed her lips, picking up the battered suitcases that were marked with her name. Dorothy narrowed her eyes and peered through the darkness. The street lamps dropped shallow pools of light around their stems, but the rest. Something about this place. Was it the fog? Well, no, she'd expected that. But perhaps it was the solidness of the place that made it seem so strangely unfamiliar. She shook her head. Somehow she thought she'd know this England, this green and pleasant, God save the Queen land of hopes and glory. But still it seemed strange. A man cried out, "Evening paper!" repeating his call, and she followed that voice, dipping her feet in the rhythm of his words, each line shining in her head as the words came back to her, those children's treasury poems for all, succulent verses that she knew so well, rolling her tongue on the James of it all, the Wordsworth, Tennyson and Shakespeare of it all. But however she tried, she just couldn't see the hosting of daffodils as a possibility. Not in these satanic streets, not in these smoke-blackened mills. No clouds of yellow gold to dissolve the flesh in. No, this place was flesh, flesh on the bone. Not just the words, but the flesh and white bones of it. So, last one. So that, I was trying to convey there, if you like, the discordance that happened with people who came to what they thought was their culture, which was in some way familiar. They knew the poetry, they knew the pictures, they had it in, but what they found was not what they thought of. The next bit really, I was speaking to somebody about children and trauma, is something about what happens, how children metabolize difference. What you've got to imagine has happened previously is that, I always speak of me in the third person, by the way, when I'm talking about the book. It's probably weird, but I don't need analysis on it anymore. I've drawn a picture of myself, remembering I'm the only black child in the class, and I've painted myself with a pink face. And my mother says, that's lovely, but, you know, look at your skin. Your skin's like this. And it's only at that point that I kind of go, oh my goodness, you're right. And this is what happens afterwards. So this is now 1959, just a few days after the months after the section I've written. Mummy had told her she could change the colour. Jackie splashed the black paint on the back of her hand, rubbed it so it dried to an even stain, and put the brush on the table. She lifted the pot to her nose and breathed it in. Yes, there it was. At last she could smell that place on the island, from long, long ago, where the earth had boiled and bubbled. She remembered one day it had even shaken at her touch, everything stirring and life rising up from the darkness. She had seen it. That's referring to a section where there's an earthquake in Jamaica, by the way. Jackie was standing in the classroom, but her feet were gripping onto something else, to a moment, a day she could still remember, when she'd stepped on that place where the earth was like chocolate squeezing between her toes, where she'd stepped on that place, where she stepped on that place where the earth had pressed her heart-beating feet to its soul with its kisses, when she walked, when she ran, when her hands had touched the sky, where the earth was so sweet in her mouth she'd sucked it dry and the juice had run from her lips, and Mummy had told her not to eat it anymore. And Jackie remembered that after that she had eaten the dirt every day when Mummy was away at work, and that her belly had started getting bigger and she'd got sick. So Mummy had gone to the doctor for some medicine, and then she'd said to Jackie, open your mouth, swallow it down for me. Then Jackie had started screaming, but Mummy was yelling too, so Jackie had to swallow the nasty medicine, even though it tasted like a stink. One night, when the moon was like a slice of melon peeping through the spaces of her fingers, and the lamplight was flickering through the crack of the outhouse door, the shadows had come again, and this time they danced inside her belly. Then there was a groaning, and she pushed it away, pushed and pushed till she had to stand up, because a worm had come out, all white and curling, even as it hung between her legs and fell into the toilet. This time, Jackie decided, whatever happened, even if it hurt her tummy, she'd keep what she was doing a secret. She wouldn't say anything about what she had eaten, not even to her mummy. Jackie tilted the pot. The black paint glistened. Jackie thought of the golly men dancing. She thought about their faces and the taste of the milk. Would black paint taste like the earth? Would the earth-shaded darkness shine starlight on her skin? Jackie put the pot to her lips and gulped it. Cool on her lips, the dark cream sliding down her throat so easy. Now all that black paint was inside her, and she'd be more than a half the thing. She stroked her belly. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Jacqueline. Nice and moving. Are there any questions? Thoughts? Well, I know it's thoughts, observations.
Stunned.
A book worth reading, perhaps.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I would really recommend, if you haven't read it, that you do read this book. I mean, it's for me as a social researcher, and I've been doing research both on adults whose children were social migrants, were serial migrants, in other words, who had that experience of being left in the Caribbean and then joining their parents, and also of people who grew up in households which were visibly ethnically different. And I think that it is amazing to get a book that deals with both of those issues, that is actually based on memoir, but also reads like fiction, and yet documents the experience of a generation so very well in ways that just aren't on the agenda usually. And you know, I've been giving it as presents to many people, and I'm sure if you read it, you will feel the same. So plug.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that. Any questions? Thank you again, Jack.
I don't know how to turn it off.
Oh, do I? What I perhaps should have done, I'm assuming that everyone round, you know who we are around the table. I'm Cecile, Jenny, and Naomi. Okay. Oh dear, the Academy.
Oh, that's the wrong question.
No. Well, it's basically, for me, it's about my place of work. I work in higher education, and my experience of working in higher education as a black woman, and what it does for me on a daily basis, and what I know it's doing to my physical and mental health. Being within the institution that I work in, a predominantly white, patriarchal, racist structure, and being aware of how it's eroding my health. Part of being in there is not so much for me about the direct or daily abuse that I have to put up with, because I do have to put up with that, and you can counter it to some extent. Part of me countering it is being there as little as possible, but it's being enveloped in a really oppressive environment, whether people speak to you or not. So it's the culture and the ethos of working in there, for me, that is so worrying and dangerous for my health. And then I have to cope with it, the institution, mentally, in terms of the paradox and the contradictions that I work with. So I work within the academy as we understand it, that is imbued, informed by liberal cultural values that surround rationality, listening to the arguments, respecting others, respecting difference, but knowing that me being there as a black woman is a sort of difference that they don't want. And that is reflected not only in the day-to-day interaction that I have, but in the whole culture and the ethos of where I work. And when one uses the academy, one is not necessarily talking about your specific institution necessarily, but it's the whole way in which higher education, my understanding anyway, is framed and what it represents. And my institution is just a personal encounter, but what I encounter, my understanding, is reflected throughout higher education. But that's my perception.
You never hear me? John Denham, when he was Secretary of State for Higher Education, talked about the higher education as being one of those arenas in which leads to things such as social justice and so forth. Mandela said that education is one of those things that helps towards liberation. I'm writing a paper which I talk about the roles and responsibilities of higher education. All of the things that Cecile said is that on the outside, it seems to embrace all of these things about liberation, all of those things, that's where you go to find freedom. That's where you go to better yourself. And yet, within the context of higher education, you're caught up with that juxtaposition, that position of the paradox of saying, how do we change? How do we change things for others when we ourselves are caught in this highly intensely oppressive situation, yeah, that many people outside of that fail to understand. Yeah? So when we talk about the academy, it's symbolic that far from dealing with many oppressive situations that is often deemed as being outside of, it's integral to what is going on.
Somebody at the back?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to do is to thank you and the Bradford University for providing such a great day and for the fantastic presenters you had today. For me personally, it's been amazing to be with professionals, with academics, black women who are speaking from a very different perspective. So for me, it was a very enriching day. I think what I wanted to ask was, because we've picked up on so many different strands today, what's next? Is this going to be spread out wider, for example, into other sectors? Because I know for me, coming from the violence against women sector, this is what's missing. And so what happens for women who work in the sector, who work specifically around violence and women? This is missing, because usually we're the lone voice that's talking about that black woman's perspective. So for me, it would be really valuable if this is then carried on or taken into different sectors and the debate widens.
Jenny, please, yeah.
I'm going to stand in front of here so that it can be captured on the web.
Oh, right.
Because the people on the webcam must be thinking, what's going on there? First of all, I'd really like to thank you all for being here today. In a way, today is it's a culmination of some discussions that have started many years ago. And there are a few people here, Cecile, Anne, and Cecily, who was here. Yeah. Oh, she's still here, yes. And I met 4 years ago and said, you know, it's really urgent, the issue of black women's health, and we need to start to do something about it. And then Naomi and I started the discussion sort of a couple of years ago about how we were going to put something together. So it is really wonderful to see it happening today and to have so many interested people. And, you know, we've set up the webcam because there were so many people who were interested, but, you know, we didn't have space for in this room. So we definitely see it as a start. It was difficult getting the funding, but we did get funding from the Research Development Fund at the Open University for the day. But some of the things that we would like to see happen in the future is that we would like to see the setting up of a research network. Is everybody happy with their email addresses being circulated? Yes. So that's the first thing we can do anyhow, is to make sure that everybody's got a kind of knows who else was here and how to contact them. In terms of publication, we have got approval from the journal Critical Public Health. They will publish all the papers subject to peer review in 2012, so it's in about a year's time. Over a year's time they'll publish all the papers. So at least we'll start contributing to a kind of body of scholarship around black women and health. And what we would hope to do also is to be able to circulate all the PowerPoints, and I think all the presenters are happy with that happening. So that will happen as well. But should I do my great long list of thank yous?
I think, is there anything you could say directly in response to the woman at the back who asked
women and violence,
about the possibility of cascading, what we've done today, taking it into other arenas?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Another sector.
There's definitely an overlap between black women's health and other aspects.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, you know, women and violence, that's got a direct impact, obviously, on health. What I wouldn't like to commit us to is working at this moment, that's gone off, that's okay now, with other sectors, because certainly the group of us that have been involved in getting this together, we don't have the resources to stretch to go to other sectors. But perhaps, you know, we could work with,
yes,
you know, other people who want to do something, and we can actually give you our advice, our support, and tell you, you know, how we did certain things. And certainly this facility, we could help you to book this facility if that's what you wanted to do. But I wouldn't certainly want to say, yes, I'm going to go to all the other sectors. But, hi, Cecily. So, I can't hear you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true, actually. I think we could learn a lot from other sectors. I mean, what I would like to see is if we could get a research network going, that we'd have events like this, you know, perhaps once every 6 months, perhaps when we get going once every 3 months, so that we can come together and bring, you know, whatever research is happening in other sectors that impact on health. That's what it would be good to do. And, you know, perhaps, you know, some people might want to offer their assistance in kind of organising things. So
yeah, and you specifically, why not contact us, and we will work with you to assist you in perhaps putting on an event of this nature that focuses on those issues that interfaces with health. Yes.
The research represents the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that anybody else wants to say about the way forward and the future? Yeah?
Yeah, my name's Jennifer Luke. I've spoken to lovely people today. And I was just thinking about play, you know, in terms of what are we actually going to do about this situation in terms of how we're going to deal with our levels of stress. That's where I'm coming from. I'm actually a therapist coach, and I have a passion for working with black women. I work extensively throughout London, West and South. I actually travel to South London at least twice a week to actually engage with black women in South and East London, just so that I can get access to black women who've got mental health and wellbeing issues. You know, so if anybody wants to talk to me about what I do, they're more than welcome. I'm more than happy for anybody to have my email address. But it's that element of play. We're all hard workers. What do we actually do? Play and keeping ourselves well and keeping this all going as a group.
Yeah, I think that's really important in terms of the renewal, because we do have to look at ways in which we can sustain ourselves and improve our own health. So I think that's really important. Any more comments? So it leaves me to thank everybody. First of all, I want to thank you all for being such a kind of engaged and participating audience. You know, your comments and your kind of involvement has been wonderful. I'd like to thank all the speakers, because the speakers have just been dynamic. You know, all coming from different perspectives. Because one of the other things that we wanted this seminar to do was to demonstrate that, you know, we've got lots of black women who are doing things, and, you know, we need to be able to make sure that those spaces are there for black women to actually present the work that they're doing. So thank you all to all the speakers. Can I thank our two excellent chairs, Cecile and Anne, who have just been really wonderful, and, you know, and then there are a number of people who aren't here but have really worked behind the scenes to get this going. Catherine Perry, who was here earlier in the research office, she's just been really good responding to all your emails and making sure that everybody got all the kind of right information. Tony and John, who've helped to set up the webcast and all the AV. I hope you all liked the wonderful marketing leaflets with a photograph from Banley Burke, because so many people actually came to me, this was at the Open University, and said, what a kind of stunning photograph. So I'd like to thank Vanley, and even though we're focusing on black women's health, there are lots of issues on black men's health that, you know, somebody somewhere needs to take up. And yes, there is a black man here.
There is a black man here.
You can have that responsibility. The Research and Development Fund at the Open University for funding it. And Linda Johns, she was one of the people who helped put together all the conference pack. So I think, and anybody else I might have forgotten to thank. And I want to thank my co-conspirator, Naomi, who has just been wonderful. It's just been wonderful working with Naomi, so thank you. Right, so before you all leave, can I ask you to make sure, in your pack you've got an evaluation form. Please, can you fill that in so I can take the evaluation form?
I'd also like to thank Jenny for being so patient, taking our ideas that came together 4 years ago and turning it into something tangible. So could you please give a hand to Jenny?
I can actually say, I couldn't say at the beginning because I didn't want it to influence the day, but the reason why there was a gap between when we met and us having this now is that we met, I think, on the 29th of February that year, wasn't it? 29th of February in 2008 to discuss this, and on the 9th of March I had a stroke. So I was kind of out of circulation for a couple of years.
Real life issues.
That's right. So it was my promise in a way to myself that when I came back to working around health, that I wasn't going to forget about black women's health issues, because they are matters, as I said at the beginning, of life and death. And that's why it's really important that we keep it on the agenda, not just for me, but for lots of other black women out there. Because I thought, well, if this happens to me, and I work in the health field, what is happening to lots of other women who don't work in the field or who don't have the knowledge? So I'm afraid that is my mission now.